Beneath the headlines of history lies a shadowed ledger, pages never meant for public eyes, inked in the blood of forgotten orders. These are the whispers sealed in vaults and the coordinates struck from maps. What we've been told is the war's ending was only the opening act, and the truth waits in the cold silence between erased lines, where even the victors feared to look. At 3:12 hours on April 26, 1945, 3 days before Hitler's final recorded appearance in the Reich Chancellery, Luftwaffe Ju-352 transport Eisvogel was cleared for takeoff from Tempelhof under weather conditions Berlin meteorologists had described as impossible for sustained flight. The order came not from Göring's office, but from an unlisted command circuit identified later as RKL/17, believed to be reserved for Reich Main Security Office, RSHA, transmissions. The aircraft's flight plan, recovered from British intercept archives decades later, was deliberately falsified to suggest a routine courier run to Prague. However, surviving Luftwaffe ground crew logs show that the Eisvogel was loaded not with mail or dispatches, but with 12 sealed metal crates, each marked with a stenciled black triangle containing an unbroken white circle. 2 Wehrmacht clerks tasked with witnessing the cargo manifest were dismissed from service within hours and their personnel files destroyed. The escort detail for the flight was unusual. 4 Waffen-SS officers of Sonderkommando U-13, a small and largely undocumented unit rumored to have been under the personal authority of SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, architect of the Reich's secret weapons program. The unit's insignia, a raven clutching a key, was noted by an RAF intelligence officer in a May 1945 field briefing, the only confirmed depiction of their emblem in Allied records. British Y-service radio operators at Chiksans received partial Luftwaffe transmission fragments suggesting the plane's final heading was toward the Bay of Biscay. The signal abruptly ceased over central France. That might have been the end of the story, had it not been for a series of fragmentary files unsealed under the UK's 30-year rule in 1975. Among them was a 1946 Naval Intelligence Division (NID) memorandum marked "For PM's Eyes Only." It described an intercepted Argentine naval message reporting the arrival of an unmanifested European air delivery near the remote fishing village of San Antonio Este, Patagonia, in July 1945, 3 months after Eisvogel's departure. The Argentine report, translated from cipher, stated the cargo had been transferred to 2 civilian lorries under the escort of German-speaking men in non-uniform dress. No further tracking was possible. The delivery disappeared inland. In 1963, a violent storm off the Patagonian coast tore fishing nets from a trawler operating near the Valdez Peninsula. When the crew retrieved their gear, they found metallic shards unlike any shipwreck debris, lightweight, with an oddly iridescent sheen. A Buenos Aires metallurgical lab identified the alloy as containing a high percentage of titanium and a rare isotope of vanadium, composition not consistent with any known pre-1950 manufacturing process. The samples vanished 2 weeks later from the lab's secure storage. The night watchman resigned and emigrated to Chile the same month. The threat of the Eisvogel resurfaced again in 1978, when a retired Argentine Air Force colonel, Jorge V. Landa, approached a BBC producer after a conference in Geneva. Landa claimed to have overseen aerial reconnaissance flights in 1946 over the Patagonian interior, during which his crews photographed geometric excavations in a high plateau region inaccessible by conventional road. According to Landa, these photographs were seized by Argentine military intelligence and forwarded to foreign partners under a classified cooperation agreement. He refused to identify the partners, citing continuing obligations, but his implication was clear. Deeper investigation into Sonderkommando U-13 through post-war SS personnel interrogations yielded almost nothing. Most claimed no knowledge of the unit's existence. One former officer, Hauptsturmführer Ernst Faulkner, testified in 1948 to a U.S. counterintelligence corps team in Wiesbaden that Kammler had established a special transport list in late March 1945 containing articles of decisive post-war importance. Asked to elaborate, Faulkner replied only, "Things which could not be allowed to fall into Russian hands, under any circumstances." He died of a reported heart attack in his cell before the next scheduled interrogation. Modern German archivists reviewing the surviving Luftwaffe loss lists note that the Eisvogel is absent from official wartime records, suggesting it was administratively erased even before its departure. This level of deletion required direct intervention from the Luftwaffe Führungsstab, something done only for missions of extreme sensitivity, such as nuclear research transport or foreign head of state visits. Attempts to obtain further documentation through the Bundesarchiv have been consistently blocked under clauses citing matters of national security involving third nations. In 1991, an FOIA request to the U.S. Department of Defense for intercepted communications relating to Luftwaffe transport flights between April and July 1945 returned 127 pages of heavily redacted material, with only a handful of legible terms: magnetothermal, containment vessel, Kammler priority. The ultimate fate of the Eisvogel and its cargo remains unresolved. Theories range from components of an unfinished German nuclear device, to advanced propulsion prototypes, to archival material intended to barter with Allied intelligence for the safe passage of senior Nazi officials. None can be proven without the missing documentation. One of the few surviving British intelligence officers to have worked on the case, Group Captain Peter Ashworth, gave a final recorded interview in 1998. When asked directly what he believed had been on the Eisvogel, he paused for nearly 30 seconds before answering, "It wasn't meant to win that war. It was meant to decide the next one." That single remark, made more than half a century after the aircraft's disappearance, remains the closest anyone has come to acknowledging what Operation Eisvogel truly carried into the skies that night, through the ruins of Berlin, into the fog of surrender, and possibly to the other side of the world. On January 17, 1942, in the snow-choked passes of the Eastern Carpathians, OSS Field Operative First Lieutenant Thomas A. Keating transmitted his final message from a shortwave set hidden in a false-bottom field crate. His orders, issued from the OSS station in Ankara, were to intercept a Soviet defector known only by the codename Falconer, believed to carry detailed schematics of German fortifications along the Dnieper line. The rendezvous point was an abandoned Austro-Hungarian signal station near the Romanian border. British SIS traffic logs confirm Keating's last full transmission at 23:46 hours, reporting visual contact with Falconer and two shadowed figures approaching from the North Ridge. At 0:21, an unidentified burst transmission on a previously unused frequency was received at the Cairo wireless station. 7 seconds long, unintelligible to cipher clerks, and never repeated. Minutes later, Keating's main channel went silent. The only surviving field note fragment, recovered from a Prague flea market in 1987, bore a hurried scrawl: "If this reaches you, destroy Vector Blue before Moscow or Berlin does." Captured German Gebirgsjäger soldiers, interrogated by Soviet SMERSH agents in Lviv weeks later, described stumbling upon the aftermath of a gunfight in deep snow. The site, they claimed, showed signs of heavy-caliber automatic fire from two opposing directions. They also reported seeing an unmarked twin-engine aircraft lift off from a clearing beyond the treeline, climbing into the blizzard without running lights. SMERSH files on this debriefing were later withdrawn from the KGB archives and marked, "Do not circulate, special storage." A post-war search of German operational records yielded no official account of Falconer's defection attempt, nor of any Wehrmacht patrols in the area that night. The absence is notable. The region was under strict surveillance due to the vulnerability of Axis supply lines into southern Ukraine. The only indirect reference comes from a February 1942 diary entry by General Hans von Grafenberg, Wehrmacht liaison to OKW, "Unusual mountain skirmish east of Chernivtsi, outcome not reported to Army Group South. Possible SS involvement. Leave to Berlin under sealed orders." The codename Vector Blue appears in only two known intelligence documents. The first is a fragmentary OSS signal routing sheet dated January 11, 1942, listing VB/Intercept 9 as a high-priority matter for Allied field stations in Ankara, Tehran, and Kuibyshev. The second, declassified by the CIA in 1979, is a heavily redacted post-war memorandum addressed to the National Security Council, referencing Vector Blue material transferred to Allied custody, subsequently lost, 1946-47. Attempts to track Falconer's identity point to a likely candidate, a Soviet chemical engineer named Alexei Mihailovich Sobolev, who disappeared from the Yaroslavl Synthetic Materials Institute in late 1941. Sobolev's research focused on polymer-based protective coatings for aerial delivery systems, a fact that, if combined with German advances in high-altitude bomber design, might have been of catastrophic strategic importance. His family was told he perished in the siege of Leningrad. Internal NKVD personnel rolls suggest otherwise, listing him as transferred special account in December 1941. An overlooked clue surfaced in 1954, when a British Foreign Office courier in Vienna reported being approached by a white-haired man with a limp, who identified himself as a former Red Army signals officer. The man claimed to have intercepted an encrypted German transmission on the night of Keating's disappearance, containing the phrase, Blaue Vektor bestätigt, Übergabe vollständig, blue vector confirmed, transfer complete. Before he could be questioned further, the man collapsed in the street and died of what Austrian police described as sudden cardiac failure. The Prague notebook fragment remains the most tangible artifact tied to the case. Analysis of the paper stock shows it was manufactured in Krakow in late 1941, a type often used in German field journals. The handwriting has been verified as Keating's by FBI forensic experts using pre-war correspondence with his sister in Boston. For decades, this single page sat in a private collection until it was anonymously donated to the Imperial War Museum in 1992, along with a note reading only, "He was right." By the late 1960s, the CIA's own Internal History Division considered Operation Vector Blue unsolved with potential live implications. A 1969 memorandum to the Director of Central Intelligence recommended that all related files remain classified indefinitely, citing probable intersection with Soviet-era bioweapons research and post-war asset agreements. Those files remain unreleased. There is no burial record for Thomas Keating. His OSS personnel jacket, obtained under FOIA in 2004, ends abruptly with a single entry on January 19, 1942. Status: MIA, presumed dead. Personal effects: none. The falconer, if he survived, left no confirmed trace in either Western or Soviet records after that winter night. The official position of both US and British intelligence remains that the encounter was an isolated failed extraction with no strategic consequence. But the scattered evidence, intercepted phrases, erased Soviet reports, a single scrawled warning, suggests a mission whose true objective was never acknowledged. Whatever Vector Blue was, both Berlin and Moscow wanted it. Only one seems to have left the Carpathians with it. In June 1952, a Royal Air Force listening post in Kinloss intercepted a faint Morse transmission on a frequency once reserved for Kriegsmarine Enigma traffic. The signal, distorted by atmospheric interference, repeated the same 5-letter groupings for nearly 40 minutes before cutting off abruptly. Its origin was triangulated to a point off Jan Mayen Island, a barren volcanic outpost in the Norwegian Sea, hundreds of miles from established shipping routes. The coordinates marked a location with no known wartime wrecks. Yet when Norwegian naval archives were checked, a single entry in a 1944 convoy report listed U-boot on Kanung, U-boat without designation, cited briefly in the same waters, days before vanishing from pursuit. No hull number, no conning tower markings, and, most unusual, no record in the meticulous Kriegsmarine U-boot WAF loss lists. The Royal Navy's Special Boat Squadron dispatched a small team to investigate, traveling aboard the survey vessel HMS Shackleton. Diving conditions were treacherous, frigid currents, poor visibility, and volcanic silt that clung to equipment. On their third descent, divers located the hulk of a Type IXD-2 submarine lying at a steep angle on the seabed. Its hull bore no wartime corrosion consistent with 8 years under saltwater. Paint flakes still clung to the plating, and the conning tower's rivets appeared recently tooled. The entry hatch was sealed from the inside. Using hydraulic cutters, the team gained access to the forward compartment. The interior was unervingly empty, no crew remains, no personal effects, not even the expected corrosion of exposed metal. Every instrument panel had been stripped clean. In the aft compartment, however, they found a single watertight canister secured with heavy brackets to the bulkhead. It bore an embossed Reichsadler insignia without a swastika, an anomaly for wartime markings. The canister was immediately hoisted to the surface under strict orders from the attending RN intelligence officer, Commander Richard Farnham. Witnesses later recalled his repeated use of the phrase, "Category Black," a term absent from any known Royal Navy classification system. The Shackleton returned to Portsmouth under escort, its cargo flown within hours to RAF Hendon under the supervision of MI6 officers. No inventory was filed with the Ministry of Defense. The official dive logs list 4 divers for the Jan Mayen operation. By 1971, only one was still alive, Petty Officer Graham Kershaw. In a taped interview with an investigative journalist that same year, Kershaw described entering the conning tower and finding, freshly painted in black tar, a swastika, its edges still tacky to the touch. The implication was chilling. The symbol had been applied well after 1945. Research into Type IXD-2 production records identified only 2 boats unaccounted for after the war, U-234 and U-890. Both were known to have been fitted for long-range cargo missions. U-234's fate was well documented. She surrendered to U.S. forces in May 1945 carrying uranium oxide and advanced weapon components bound for Japan. U-890's last confirmed sighting was in Kiel in March 1945. Her subsequent movements remain a blank. Norwegian fishermen on Jan Mayen recall, in the early summer of 1952, seeing strange lights over the sea at night, steady glows rather than flares or aircraft navigation lights. They also reported low, mechanical sounds carrying over the water for hours. None of these sightings were formally logged by the Coast Guard. In 1989, a classified NATO document leaked to a Danish newspaper suggested that the Jan Mayen Wreck's canister contained technical apparatus of non-Allied origin, electromagnetic in application, likely post-war in manufacture. The leak was dismissed as fabrication, but it aligned with the Ministry of Defense's long-standing refusal to release dive photographs, citing potential implications for alliance relations. The most disturbing element came from a fragment of decrypted Soviet Navy signals traffic from September 1952. The message referenced acquisition at Jan Mayen, primary cargo removed before NATO arrival. If accurate, it would mean that whatever the Shackleton recovered was only part of the wreck's original contents. By the late 1990s, Jan Mayen's volcanic terrain had shifted due to tectonic activity, burying much of the wreck beneath hardened lava and ash. Modern survey teams report that the site is now inaccessible without major excavation, an unlikely prospect given its classified history. Commander Farnham retired in 1959 and never spoke publicly about the operation. His personal papers, held in a sealed collection at the National Archives, remain closed until 2065 under Special Retention Order, cabinet level. No official connection between the 1952 Morse transmission and the discovery of the submarine has ever been acknowledged. Yet among naval intelligence veterans, the Jan Mayen Wreck remains shorthand for an operation that reached into the murkiest depths of the Cold War. A submarine that should have rusted away under 8 years of seawater. A radio channel long thought dead sparking briefly back to life. And a sealed canister, its contents unknown, spirited away before the public could even learn that such a vessel existed. On March 18, 1961, a railway maintenance crew in the lower Silesian town of Wallam reported an unusual subsidence near an unused track spur. The collapse revealed a section of reinforced concrete wall embedded deep beneath the soil. Upon closer inspection, the wall contained a rusted steel hatch, welded shut from the outside and covered in decades of grime. Local police, uncertain of the site's origins, notified the regional military authority in Wrocław. Within 48 hours, the Polish Ministry of Internal Affairs assumed control, cordoning off the area under the pretext of unstable terrain. The following week, a 7-man survey team from the Warsaw University of Technology's Department of Civil Engineering arrived, escorted by officers from the Służba Bezpieczeństwa, SB. Their official remit was geological assessment. In reality, the operations coordination came from Soviet military engineers attached to the 2nd Guards Tank Army. Declassified railway construction maps from 1942 later revealed the site to be part of the unfinished Reese complex, a network of underground facilities the Nazis had begun carving into the Owl Mountains during the final years of the war. After 3 days of preliminary work, oxyacetylene torches breached the hatch. The tunnel beyond was lined with intact steel panels, each stamped with the eagle and swastika insignia of the organization tote. The air inside was stale but breathable. The survey team advanced nearly 300 meters before encountering a vast subterranean chamber filled with enormous, dust-coated turbines and power conduits. The machinery, though dormant, appeared remarkably well preserved. Heavy shielding surrounded several enclosed vaults along the chamber's perimeter. The vault doors bore placards reading Projekt Morgenrot, Zugriff nur auf Befehl Kammler, access only by Kammler's order. Hans Kammler, SS Obergruppenführer and head of the Reich's secret weapons programs, had vanished in May 1945. His connection to Projekt Morgenrot was unknown to Allied interrogators. No such program appears in surviving German armaments records. Soviet archives, however, contain fragmentary references to Morgenrot in the wartime correspondence of General Ivan Serov, describing energy experiments intended for weaponization. A 1944 NKVD intelligence summary, declassified in 1991, claimed the program involved plasma discharge mechanisms requiring high-output generators. By the fifth day underground, the Polish team had restored partial electrical power using portable generators. Several turbines spun freely, their bearings still lubricated. Instrument gauges flickered, displaying unfamiliar calibration units. Soviet engineers reportedly expressed alarm at readings from one sealed vault, though no specific data was recorded in the surviving log. On March 27, orders arrived from Warsaw to halt exploration. All personnel were reassigned under sealed postings. Civil engineering students involved in the initial breach were drafted into military service within a month. None reappeared in academic records. 2 days later, local residents reported distant rumbling from beneath the Owl Mountains, followed by a dull, concussive sound. Military convoys were seen moving into the area at night. By morning, the tunnel entrance had collapsed under what the ministry described as a controlled demolition for safety purposes. When journalists attempted to visit the site, they were turned back by armed patrols. For decades, the official narrative maintained that the discovery had been a minor wartime storage bunker containing obsolete machinery. Yet scattered evidence points to a larger story. A 1962 Soviet Army logistics manifest, recovered from the Podolsk archives in 1993, lists specialized heavy generator components shipped from Wallam to a classified research facility in Novosibirsk. Western intelligence analysts note that several Soviet high-energy physics projects began in Novosibirsk that same year, projects whose technical descriptions bear uncanny similarity to theories explored in German wartime patents seized by the Allies in 1945. Former SB officer Kazimierz Lis, in a 1984 interview smuggled to the West, claimed that at least 2 of the sealed vaults had been opened before the demolition. Inside, he said, were rotating assemblies housed in magnetic containment frames, along with crates of technical documents marked with both German and Czech text. Lis alleged that Soviet handlers removed these materials in unmarked trucks before ordering the site destroyed. His testimony, though unverifiable, aligns with independent accounts from Wallam residents who recall seeing unfamiliar military insignia on the arriving vehicles, insignia not belonging to the Polish or Soviet armies. The collapse of the Projekt Morgenrot tunnel effectively erased one of the last physical traces of the Reis complex. Satellite imagery from 1972 shows the site as an unbroken swath of forest, with no visible disturbance. Official Polish geological maps omit the area entirely. Requests for excavation permits in the 1990s were denied under national security provisions still in force from the Cold War era. Whether Projekt Morgenrot represented an experimental energy weapon, a power source for advanced weapons research, or something else entirely, remains unknown. All surviving documentation is fragmentary, often second-hand, and buried in classified archives across 3 countries. What is certain is that in March 1961, a door welded shut since 1945 was opened, only to be sealed forever just days later, taking its secrets with it. On March 14, 1946, the U.S. Navy cargo vessel USS Brister docked in Yokohama Harbor to receive surrendered Japanese material for transfer to Allied technical intelligence teams. Among the deliveries was a battered coastal freighter, the Hokusei Maru, seized by U.S. occupation forces in the port of Omuta, Kyushu. The ship's manifest had been hastily rewritten in pencil, omitting the original cargo description. Crates in the hold bore no military markings, only the kanji, Wind Death, stenciled in black. Inside the crates were precision-machined rotors, tubular housings, and an assortment of aerodynamic fairings. Accompanying documents, bound in waxed cloth, were written in a mix of Japanese and German. Technical sketches matched Luftwaffe drafting conventions and carried signatures of engineers known to have worked under Messerschmitt's high-altitude bomber program. One schematic was titled Kurokaze, a joint Axis project believed to involve the dispersal of aerosols at extreme altitude. Initial handling of the crates fell to personnel from the 5250th Technical Intelligence Company, whose report, still partially classified, mentions rotational assemblies for centrifugal compression, possible airborne distribution system. A naval intelligence liaison flagged the materials for transfer to Fort Detrick, Maryland, the U.S. Army's biological warfare research facility. Before departure, the Hokusei Maru's crew of 16 was placed under military custody for questioning at the Sugamo prison complex. None of the crew appeared in post-war repatriation records. The only trace is an internal U.S. Army memo from April 1946 noting disposition. Foreign nationals, relocated per CI directive. The term CI likely referred to counterintelligence corps handling of sensitive detainees. Japanese maritime logs for the Hokusei Maru end in November 1944, when the vessel was officially listed as lost to Allied submarine action. How it reappeared 18 months later, carrying German-engineered components, remains unanswered. A surviving fragment from the Kurokaze documentation surfaced in 1968 during the estate auction of a former Army Air Forces intelligence officer. The page shows performance calculations for an aircraft operating above 35,000 feet, releasing particulate matter over a projected range exceeding 200 nautical miles. Chemical analysis annotations reference compounds consistent with early nerve agent precursors. The auction lot was withdrawn without explanation. The fragment disappeared into private hands. Declassified U.S. weather reconnaissance reports from mid-1947 contain unexplained entries for night flights, restricted over the Nevada Test and Training Range. Civilian witnesses in the area described faint contrails at dusk and slow-falling ash that settled on ranchland, leaving a chemical odor. Local authorities attributed these accounts to dust storms, though no such storms were recorded on the dates in question. Internal correspondence from Fort Detrick's director to the Pentagon in September 1947 refers obliquely to field performance trials, KZ configuration, and satisfactory dispersal in low humidity conditions. British intelligence files, released under the UK's 50-year rule, indicate that SIS Station Tokyo reported on Kurokaze in early 1945, citing Japanese Army Air Force experimentation with high-altitude aerosol delivery methods. The report emphasized that German technical advisors were present at the testing airfields, which were located on Formosa, modern Taiwan. These trials allegedly used modified Ki-77 long-range aircraft, none of which survived the war intact. One of the few living testimonies regarding the seizure came from Lieutenant Commander Harold Vance, USN, Ret, who in a 1981 oral history interview recalled boarding the Hokusei Maru. It was stripped down inside. No personal quarters to speak of, just bolted racks for those crates. The odd thing was, the bolts weren't corroded. They looked brand new. When pressed on what happened to the ship after unloading, Vance answered, "She didn't go to scrap, I'll tell you that. She went dark." Post-war Japanese sources remain sparse. In 1974, a memoir by former Imperial Japanese Navy officer Hideo Sugimura briefly mentions Kurokaze as a shared dream with our German brothers, stolen by fate. Sugimura died 2 months after publication. Subsequent printings omitted the reference. The Hokusei Maru's ultimate fate is unrecorded. U.S. Navy disposal records for 1946 list no such vessel, and photographic archives of occupied Japanese ports contain no verified images of her after March of that year. Requests to the U.S. Army Chemical Corps for information on Kurokaze dispersal components have been denied under exemptions citing weapons of mass destruction proliferation concerns. What remains is a scattered mosaic of evidence: German drafting signatures in a Japanese technical manual, an unlisted freighter carrying advanced dispersal mechanisms, and post-war tests in the Nevada desert under conditions matching the original project's requirements. If Operation Kurokaze reached completion, its existence was erased almost as thoroughly as the men who built it, and as quietly as the wind that carried whatever it was meant to release. Long after the smoke cleared and the flags were folded away, the machinery kept turning, buried in bunkers, carried across oceans, traded in the dark. What remains is not memory, but residue, artifacts that hum with unfinished purpose, and archives that will outlive their keepers. Somewhere, those who know are still watching, still guarding, still waiting for the day silence breaks.